They wait in silence, buried in jungles thick as memory, dark faces gazing through the mist of centuries. The Olmec heads, monoliths of basalt carved with precision that defies time, each one a sentinel, watching, remembering. They do not speak, and yet they speak, not in words but in weight, in presence, in the stillness of stone that feels alive. You look into their eyes and something looks back, something vast, something older than the jungle that now hides their world. Who were they? Who placed these giants here, in the green silence of Mesoamerica? The official story is simple, too simple. It tells us the Olmecs were the first great civilization of the Americas, that they rose around 1200 BCE, thrived for centuries, and vanished without leaving a trace of themselves except for these faces. But look closer. Does that story satisfy the question pulsing in your bones? Does it explain the strangeness of those features? Full lips, broad noses, eyes that seem carved from an ancestry far from these shores. Do they look like the faces of the tribes around them, or do they echo another world, another ocean? Some say Africa, some whisper Atlantis, others point upward to the stars. But whatever the answer, it is clear, they do not look as if they came from here. And yet, it is not just the faces. It is the aura of power that clings to them. Each head weighs tens of tons, dragged across miles of jungle without the wheel, without beasts of burden, set upright with a mastery we still cannot replicate without machines. For what purpose? Why carve a single human head so vast, so heavy, that moving it would take an army of hands? What were these stone giants meant to guard? Or to remember? Because they do feel like memory. Not memory as thought, but memory as monument. As if the Olmecs carved in stone what they feared might be lost forever. A face, a presence, a lineage that did not belong to this soil. Archaeologists will tell you stories. They will speak of chiefs and rulers. They will say these are portraits of kings. Perhaps, but look again. Do kings carve their own likeness into boulders the size of mountains? Or is this something else? Something older than royalty? Something sacred? The proportions are strange. The helmets, why helmets? What were they for? Ritual, battle, or something beyond either, something not of this world? The truth is, we do not know. We cannot know if we look only with the eyes of reason, because reason stops at the surface, and the surface of these stones is not the end, it is the threshold. Stand before one of these faces and you feel it, the hush, the weight of an enigma too heavy for the mind to lift. They are not statues, they are questions, questions cut in basalt, questions older than history. Who carved them? Who inspired them? And why do they seem so alien to the land that holds them? Perhaps the answer is not in the jungle. Perhaps it is not in the soil at all. Perhaps it lies beyond the shores of time. Because the story of the Olmecs, the real story, does not begin here, and it does not end here. It begins elsewhere. The jungle hides many things: ruins devoured by roots, roads swallowed by silence. But the greatest secret the jungle keeps is not a temple, not a tomb. It is a question. Where did the Olmecs come from? History gives us an answer too smooth, too polished, like a stone with all its edges worn away. It says, they were the first great civilization of Mesoamerica. They rose from the soil of this land, shaped by nothing but time and local tribes. A simple story, and yet Every line of that story trembles when you stand before the faces in the stone. Look at them. Really look. The lips, full, curved, carved with an elegance that suggests flesh, not myth. The noses broad, powerful, carrying echoes of another world. The eyes, deep, shadowed, holding a memory older than these jungles. Do they look like the faces of those who now call this land home? Or do they whisper of strangers, of travelers who crossed an ocean long before our history books dare to imagine such things? Some scholars have noticed, quietly, in journals no one reads, they compare those features to others, faces carved in far-off lands, faces painted on the walls of tombs across the sea, and the resemblance is not easy to dismiss. Could it be Africa? The idea haunts the margins of academia like a ghost, not because the evidence is weak, but because the implications are vast. If the Olmecs came from across the Atlantic, then our maps of the ancient world are wrong, our timelines shattered. The ocean was not a barrier, but a bridge. And if it was a bridge, what else crossed it? What other truths lie drowned in the depths between the continents? But Africa is only one whisper. Others speak of a land that does not appear on any modern map, a land said to have drowned in the waves thousands of years before the Olmecs carved their first stones. Atlantis, the forbidden word, the heresy of archaeology. Could these faces be the last shadows of a world that fell into the sea? Refugees of a forgotten cataclysm, carrying fragments of their knowledge, their symbols, their blood to the shores of a new dawn. The myths of Mesoamerica speak strangely. They tell of gods who came from across the waters, bearded gods, dark-skinned gods, carrying fire, carrying knowledge, teaching the arts of stone and time. Are these merely stories, or memories dressed in the garments of myth? Official history laughs. It calls such questions fantasies, myth-making, pseudoscience. It points to carbon dates, to pottery shards, to the safe certainties of stratigraphy. But the stones do not laugh. They stand in silence, their lips sealed, their gaze unbroken, as if they know something the books do not. Something older, something heavier than the weight of academic dogma. Because here is the truth no one wants to speak. There is no proof that the Olmecs were born of this soil. None. No gradual rise from village to kingdom. No slow evolution of art and form. They appear suddenly, fully formed, with cities, with calendars, with colossal monuments that demand an engineering genius we cannot explain. How does a culture rise from nothing and carve heads that weigh 40 tons? How does it master mathematics, astronomy, and art before it learns to write its own story in letters? It does not without help, not without a spark from elsewhere. Where was that elsewhere? Across the ocean? Beyond the horizon of recorded time? Or beyond even the boundaries of this world? Some dare to ask the unthinkable. What if the Olmecs were not only migrants, but visitors? Not from Africa, not from Atlantis. From another sphere entirely, another dimension of reality that brushes ours like a shadow at dusk. Too wild? Perhaps. But the stones remain, and the stones do not care what we think. They do not bend to theory. They do not bow to dogma. They simply wait, heavy with silence, heavy with secrets carved into their curves. And in that silence, a question lingers. If the Olmecs did not come from here, where did they go? Because the enigma of their arrival is only the first thread. Pull it, and the whole fabric of history begins to unravel. There is a pattern in the old stories, a whisper in every myth. It says, "We were not alone." The Olmecs knew this, or rather, they remembered. Their cities rise suddenly, with no long prelude of crude huts and clumsy tools. One day, there is silence. The next, colossal heads, stone altars, ceremonial centers aligned with the stars, as if knowledge descended like a shadow or a gift. And always there are the faces, those heavy faces carved in basalt, as if to anchor a memory the earth would not hold. Not just portraits of kings, not just masks of power, but something else, something other. Look at them. Do you feel it? The strange tension in their features, the sense of familiarity wrapped in foreignness. They look human, almost, and yet their presence hums with a silence that feels unearthly. Where did they come from? The myths of Mesoamerica speak in riddles. They tell of beings who came across the waters, from a land that sank, from a realm of fire and light. They brought calendars. They taught the stars. They showed how to measure time and shape stone with a precision that mocks our modern hands. The Mayan Popol Vuh calls them gods, not the kind that dwell in the abstract, but gods who walk, who teach, who bleed. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the bringer of knowledge. A being who arrives from the east, gives law and wisdom, and departs, promising to return. Legends repeat the same rhythm. Arrival from elsewhere, a season of brilliance, and then disappearance. Elsewhere. What is elsewhere? Another continent? Another world? Another dimension? To the ancients, these distinctions meant nothing. Their maps were drawn not on paper, but in consciousness. To cross an ocean of water and to cross an ocean of stars, both were journeys into the unknown. So when they said gods, perhaps they did not mean winged figures in golden armor. Perhaps they meant something stranger, intelligences that bleed into our world from beyond its edges, like ink seeping through parchment. What if the Olmecs were not born here? Not fully. What if they carried in their blood a memory from a place that is no longer on any map? Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, names spoken like incantations in the dark corridors of forbidden history. Or what if that place was never land at all? What if it was a state, a frequency, a dimension that brushes against ours only at rare intervals when the veil thins, when cycles turn, when the stars align as they did 12,000 years ago? Perhaps they came through such a door, not in ships of wood, but in vessels of meaning. Perhaps they stepped down the ladder of light that mystics later called Jacob's dream. Perhaps the feathered serpent was not a myth, but a metaphor for the spiral bridge between worlds. Too strange? Then listen to the stones. The colossal heads wear helmets. Why? What battle were they fighting? What game were they playing? Or was it not a helmet at all, but a crown of memory, a sign of something they once knew? Some see echoes of flight gear, goggles, devices for travel, not of earth but of sky. Perhaps, perhaps not. But the question clings like mist. Why carve a detail no jungle king would need? And why the orientation of their cities aligned to solstices, to stars, to constellations that no farmer needs to plant his corn? Why build a civilization as if the heavens were its blueprint and time its true temple? Unless they came from a culture for whom the sky was home. And then they vanish, like a tide that leaves the shore without a trace. No empire crumbles in war, no city burns in conquest. They simply recede, leaving faces in the stone, and a silence heavy with unspoken truths. Where did they go? Did they die? Or did they return to that elsewhere from which they came? The myths say they promised to return. The feathered serpent will rise again. The cycle will turn. The gods will walk once more among men. What does that mean? Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. Because if the Olmecs were visitors not of metal and fire, but of knowledge and light, then their story is not over. It is a seed, planted in stone, waiting for the right season to bloom. And maybe that season is closer than we think. Words vanish, ink fades, scrolls rot beneath the teeth of time. But stone endures, stone remembers. Perhaps that is why the Olmecs chose it as their tongue. Not clay, not bark, not pigment on a wall, but mountains cut and carved into human likeness, each one heavier than 100 men, each one more silent than the grave. Why? Why speak in such a language? Why wrestle with monoliths when softer mediums were within reach? Because this was not communication. It was invocation. It was not a story for the present. It was a message for the ages. For us, the colossal heads do not speak in syllables. They speak in weight, in stillness, in the geometry of the sacred. Look at the curves, the proportions, the strange symmetry that hums with an order beyond mere portraiture. These are not random lines. They are ratios, echoes of an architecture that belongs as much to the stars as to the soil. The helmets round, enclosing, banded like rings of Saturn, the eyes half-lidded, as if gazing inward, the mouths neither smiling nor grim, but poised in an eternal breath, as if the stone itself is meditating. Do you feel it? Stand before one, and your heartbeat slows. Your breath deepens. You sense, though you cannot say why, that you are in the presence of something alive. Not alive as flesh, but alive as symbol, alive as code. The Olmecs wrote in stone because stone vibrates at a frequency of eternity. They knew this. They felt it in their bones that matter itself is a hymn, that shape is a syllable in the secret language of creation. A curve is not just a curve. It is a wave, a vibration frozen in time, a frequency the soul can hear when the ear of the heart is open. So they carved their message not for the eye, but for the inner sense, for those who would come later, when their own tongues had turned to dust, when their cities lay strangled in vines. They carved for those who could still feel, still listen, still dream. And the message was this: we were here. We are more than you think, and so are you. Some believe the heads are idols of power. Some say they are kings cast in stone. But does a king need 40 tons of basalt to proclaim his glory? Number. This is not vanity. This is transmission. Each head is an antenna, rooted in earth, tuned to sky. A node in a network we no longer understand, a web of geometry and resonance, binding the visible to the invisible. What if the heads are not merely monuments, but instruments? What if they hum with tones too low for the ear, too deep for the mind, tones that shake the dream of the world itself? Could this be why their faces seem both human and not? Because they are masks of a truth that wears many forms, a truth that is not bound to one race, one land, one moment in time. Look closer at the basalt. It came from mountains far away, dragged across rivers and jungles without the wheel, without iron, without the beasts of burden our history books demand. Why such effort? Why break the spine of a people to move a stone when softer things could suffice? Because the message had to last, not for decades, not for dynasties, but for millennia. They wrote their story in the hardest script the earth could offer, because they knew what would come: floods, fires, the slow grinding teeth of time. But stone endures. And so the message remains, silent but not mute, waiting but not gone. The Olmec spoke the language of stone because stone is the tongue of the eternal, because stone sings, even when the singer is gone, because in the vibration of that weight is a secret only the patient can hear. Do you hear it? Lean close. Close your eyes. Feel the hush pressing on your skin like the deep sea. There is something in it. Something like a word, but older than words. Something like a pulse, but vaster than blood. It says, "We were here, but not from here." And if you listen longer, it says something more. It says, "Neither are you." Before history, there was memory. Before chronicles, there were stories. And before stories, there were whispers in the dark, carried on the breath of firelight, spoken not to inform, but to keep alive the pulse of something too vast for names. The Olmecs are gone. Their cities sleep beneath the roots. Their temples crumble, strangled by vines. But the myths remain. And in those myths, fragments of a truth survive like shards of a mirror scattered in the jungle loam. Listen to the voices of Mesoamerica. They speak of beings who came from the sea, not traders, not raiders, teachers, bringers of wisdom, masters of the sky and the calendar of time. In the stories that drift like smoke from the Olmec dawn, there are figures who stride across oceans as if they were roads. Figures with faces unlike those of the land. Figures who arrive, dwell for a season, and vanish, promising to return when the cycle turns. The Mayas called him Kukulkan. The Aztecs named him Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a being of paradox, serpent and bird, earth and sky, matter and spirit twined in one form. He comes bearing law, astronomy, arts of measure and of mind. He comes to lift the people from darkness, and when the work is done, he departs across the eastern waters, his silhouette dissolving in the dawn. Is this a god, a myth, or a memory refracted through centuries of retelling? The serpent coils through every mythology. In Eden, it whispers knowledge. In India, it rises as Kundalini, the spiral power asleep at the root of the spine. To the Olmecs, it becomes feathered, a serpent with wings, bridging soil and sky. What does that mean? Symbols speak in layers. The serpent is earth force, rooted, coiled, heavy. The feather is spirit force, airy, unbound, infinite. To marry the two is to create a ladder, a living bridge between worlds. Was Quetzalcoatl a man, a god, or a traveler from elsewhere whose science seemed like sorcery to the eyes of Stone Age kings? Perhaps all three, because in myth, such boundaries dissolve. And then there is the jaguar. The Olmecs revered it above all, not as an animal to hunt, but as a force to embody. Their priests wore its pelt. Their shamans carved its fangs into masks. Half human, half feline figures crouch on altars like creatures born of dream. Why the jaguar? Because it moves in two worlds. It walks the earth and it swims the rivers of night. Its eyes burn with a fire that pierces the dark. To the Olmec mind, it was a gatekeeper of thresholds, a master of transformation. To wear the jaguar was to slip the leash of the ordinary and hunt in realms beyond the senses. Even their gods bear the jaguar's mark. Hybrid beings, their jaws curved in feline arcs, their faces neither beast nor man, but something in between, something other. What does that echo? Does it not murmur of shamans who dissolved their shape, who stepped through cracks in the world and returned with whispers of elsewhere? Does it not recall the Sumerian tales of Apkallu, the fish-clad sages who emerged from the sea to teach men the arts of kingship? Does it not resonate with the African myths of wanderers with skin of night, bearing fire in clay pots from the east? Patterns, always patterns, repeating like waves across the shores of time. Myths remember what history forgets, and what they remember is this: Knowledge does not bloom in isolation. It descends, like a rain, like a shadow, like a serpent spiraling down the ladder of worlds. Why did the Olmecs know the stars? Why did they carve colossal heads with faces foreign to their soil? Why does their art hum with motifs that speak of passage, of metamorphosis, of flight? Because their story is not about origins alone. It is about contact. A contact so profound it left scars on stone and symbols that outlasted the tongue that spoke them. Listen deeper. Behind the carved masks, behind the serpents and jaguars, behind the feathered gods that shimmer through the myths, there is a single rhythm: arrival, gift, departure. They came, they gave, they left. Why? Perhaps because they had to. Perhaps because cycles rule all worlds, and the time of their dwelling here was done. But they did not leave without a promise. They planted that promise in myth. When the cycle turns, we will return. What does that mean? A prophecy? A metaphor for consciousness itself rising and falling like tides in the human soul? Or a memory of something yet to come, moving toward us even now like a shadow in the dawn? The myths do not answer, they only whisper. And in that whisper, the hairs rise on the back of your neck. Because some part of you, a part older than reason, remembers too. The jungle hides, the ocean buries. Time erases, but not completely. Always, it leaves traces, shadows, faint fingerprints pressed into the fabric of the earth. And if you learn to look, those fingerprints begin to glow. Start with the obvious. The Olmecs appear as if from nowhere. One day, no cities. The next, colossal heads, stone altars, astronomical alignments precise enough to shame modern surveyors. Cultures do not bloom like this in isolation. Not without roots, not without ancestors stretching back in a visible chain. And yet the chain is missing. Where is the slow rise, the crude beginnings, the primitive preludes that every civilization leaves behind? They do not exist. The Olmecs arrive like a wave, fully formed, and then recede. Science shrugs. It calls this mystery, but buries the word beneath charts and timelines, as if ink could silence the hum of the unknown. But the stones keep humming, and now, so do the genes. Fragments of ancient DNA whisper things that textbooks do not want to hear, traces that do not fit neatly into the narrative of isolation, echoes of lineages that suggest crossings, migrations, the meetings we are not supposed to imagine, patterns in skull shapes, odd resonances in blood types, hints that the people who walked these jungles carried memories not just of rivers and maize, but of oceans. Then there are the artifacts, sculptures that wear helmets like no warrior of the New World, masks with almond eyes and lips thick as African soil, serpents feathered like dragons of the Far East. Coincidence? Perhaps, but how many coincidences make a pattern? And the pattern spreads outward, across the Caribbean, into Brazil, onto islands, scattered like beads across the Pacific, traces of a story too vast to fit in the margins of our maps. What if there was a world before this one, a world that fell? Atlantis. The word burns like heresy in academic halls, but in myths, it moves like a ghost. Plato spoke of it, not as a dream, but as a memory handed down by priests who claimed to know. A land beyond the Pillars of Hercules, rich, radiant, drowned in a single night. Its people scattered like sparks from a dying fire east, west, into every dawn. And what of Mu? The vanished continent of the Pacific. Legends whisper it, though science sneers. Yet the whispers refuse to die. They curl like mist through Polynesian chants, through the hymns of Easter Island. Through the deep codes of symbols carved on stones no tide should have spared. Could the Olmecs be fragments of such a world, a remnant carrying embers of a fire that once burned across oceans? A fire that forged calendars, pyramids, and a knowledge of stars before the current dawn of man began. Some say this is madness, and yet, why do the myths converge? Why does every shore bear a story of a flood? Why do every people speak of teachers from the sea, of gods who walked among them and then vanished into the west? Coincidence again? Or memory? A memory so deep it wears the mask of fable but beats with the pulse of truth. The ocean does not give up its dead easily, but sometimes it leaves clues. Strange stone roads glimpsed in the depths off Bimini, paved platforms sleeping under the waters of Yonaguni, monoliths in places where no hand should have reached, not in the age we are told was savage and blind. Science scoffs, but the stones do not scoff. They stand, they wait. Like the colossal heads, they are thresholds, silent doors opening into a darkness older than history. The Olmecs knew something, or rather, they remembered, and they carved their remembering into stone so that time could not erase it. Not a chronicle, not a confession, but a beacon, a signal across the gulfs of forgetting. And now, in the hum of buried DNA, in the myths that refuse to die, in the megaliths sleeping under alien tides, that signal stirs again. It asks us to see what we do not wish to see, that history is not a line, but a spiral, that civilizations do not rise. Once they rise, they fall, they rise again. And perhaps, just perhaps, ours is not the first to gaze at the stars and wonder where we came from. Perhaps we are not the first to find the answer and then lose it. But the stones remember, and their silence is louder than all the books in the world. There is a silence that follows greatness, a hush that falls when the last torch gutters, when the last voice fades into the wind. The Olmecs had that silence. It came suddenly, without warning, without war drums or screams of conquest. One day, their cities thrummed with life, temples crowned the jungle canopy, priests traced the geometry of the heavens in shadow and flame, and then emptiness. Archaeology calls it decline, a word that tries to soften the wound, a word that hides more than it reveals. But walk among their ruins, feel the strangled roots coiling over shattered altars, and you know this was no slow decay, this was an ending. What ended it? No one agrees. No one dares to speak beyond whispers. Theory 1. Catastrophe. The earth shifted, the rivers rose, the sky burned. Perhaps a volcanic rage tore through their fields. Perhaps the sea swallowed their coastlines in a single black surge. Nature erases without pity, and the jungle feasts on bones. Evidence? There are hints, traces of floods, layers of ash, but nothing conclusive, nothing that explains the suddenness. Theory 2. Conquest. Strangers with spears came screaming through the green, and the Olmec cities bled. But where are the mass graves? Where are the burn marks of siege? Nowhere, as if no enemy ever touched them. Theory 3. Collapse from within. A people drunk on their own glory, rotting in the core of their power. But does that sound like those who carved eternity into basalt? Does that sound like those who mastered the rhythm of the stars? And then there is the whisper, the theory that crawls like shadow along the margins of thought. What if they did not die? What if they left? Think, why does their culture bloom so suddenly and vanish just as suddenly, like a spark that flares and then dissolves into dark? What if that spark was never meant to last? What if their presence here was a season, a mission, a seed to plant in alien soil? They came, they built, they taught, and when the work was done, they turned their faces back toward the horizon from which they came. Atlantis, Mu, or elsewhere a realm not mapped by seas, but by frequencies, by dimensions that open and close like the petals of a flower. Perhaps they returned through the same door they entered. Perhaps that door is not made of wood or stone, but of stars. Perhaps it opens only when the heavens wheel into a certain song. When the sky hums with a geometry we have forgotten how to hear. The myths seem to echo this. The gods depart. The feathered serpent sails east, shrouded in dawn mist, leaving behind a promise. When the cycle turns, we will return. And what is a cycle? A wheel, a spiral, a pattern that repeats across the long breath of time. If they left, it was not escape. It was design. Like sowers stepping from one field to the next, leaving seeds to germinate in the silence of centuries. But what if the cycle is not only theirs? What if it is ours? What if the rhythm that called them away is the same rhythm beating now, beneath the noise of our age? Do you feel it? That subtle pressure in the fabric of the world, as if something immense is stirring, as if the ground beneath our certainties is beginning to tremble. Perhaps the Olmecs did not vanish. Perhaps they folded themselves into the hidden layers of the earth, into the mythic underworld that is not beneath our feet, but beneath our consciousness, waiting, watching, until the door opens again. And here is the thought that chills the spine. If they could leave, where does that leave us? We think we rule this world. We think we are the summit of evolution. But what if we are only tenants in a house built by hands we cannot name? What if the architects have gone walking in other skies but plan to return? The myths say they will. The stones hint at it. And the silence between the trees hums with something like expectation. Because silence is not absence. It is latency. The coil before the strike. The breath before the word. And in that silence, a shadow moves. What remains after the stones? What survives when the jungle swallows cities, when the tongues of a people fall silent, when even their gods turn to ghosts? Not the details, not the dates. Those are sand. They slip through the fingers of time. What remains is the pattern, the pulse, the echo of something that refuses to die. The Olmecs are gone, and yet they are everywhere, in the myths of gods who came from the east, in the serpent that rises feathered, bridging earth and sky, in the jaguar whose eyes gleam in the dark of the underworld, in the colossal faces carved to stare across a gulf of millennia at eyes that do not yet exist, our eyes. Why? Why carve a message in stone if not because it matters, if not because it must endure? Perhaps they knew what we forget, that time is not a line, it is a spiral, that civilizations are waves rising and breaking upon the same unseen shore, and that we, with our glass towers and satellites, are not the first to stand on this edge of knowing, and will not be the last. What do the Olmecs teach? Not in words, in silence, in stone, in the weight of their absence pressing like a phantom hand upon our age. They teach that knowledge comes like a shadow, sudden and inexplicable, and that it can vanish just as swiftly. They teach that greatness does not guarantee survival, that power is not permanence, that what is built of pride will fall, and what is built of mystery will endure, even if only as a whisper in basalt. They teach that myths are not lies. They are memory dressed in dream. They are seeds planted in the soil of story, waiting for minds bold enough to break the shell. We like to think the past is dead, that we stand on its bones, that its whispers cannot touch us. But the past is not dead. It moves beneath us like a buried river, seeping into the roots of our present, rising in floods when the cycle turns. The Olmecs are that flood. Their silence is not emptiness. It is latency. It is a door half open in the jungle of time. Step through, and you begin to see the pattern: arrival, gift, departure, a rhythm that beats like a drum in the dark, older than empires, older than man. Perhaps that is why we feel it, that unease when we stare into their carved eyes, that sense that something is looking back, not just a face but a presence that knows what we pretend to forget, that our age too will pass, that the towers we build will drown in vines and dust, and that one day others will wander among our ruins and wonder, as we wonder now, who were they? Where did they go? And why do their shadows still walk in our dreams? This is what the Olmecs teach, that we are not alone in time, that history is haunted, that civilizations are not accidents, but actors in a play we do not fully comprehend, a play that repeats across cycles so vast that even the stars are stage lights, burning out between acts. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: that the mystery is not behind us, it is ahead, that the door they stepped through is not closed, that the rhythm that carried them away is swelling again, like a tide you cannot see until it is at your feet. So listen to the hum behind the noise of your world, to the silence that is not absence, but waiting. The Olmecs are gone, but they are not done. Their faces stare through jungles and centuries because their message was never for their time alone. It was for ours. What does it say? Lean close, closer. You will not hear it with your ears. You will feel it in the hush between heartbeats, in the strange tug at the edge of thought, in the dream you cannot name. It says, "We were not from here. Neither are you." The journey goes on, and the door is opening.